Got it there.
You go ahead.
You're going to wish that you came a lot closer because I got about 18 pages of stuff I have to go over.
You don't want to miss a detail.
No, that's for sure. All right, let's go ahead and get started. My name is Mike Creever, and the first thing I want to do is introduce the group that are the presenters. I don't know if we'll get to all the presenters because as we stand here and move around, I keep talking to somebody, well, I'm a presenter, but that's okay. If we run out of time, we'd like to do it within 2 hours. Make sense? Hi, Pat.
There, make sure you fill power and stop.
There, see? The one person that shouldn't be interrupting me is my own wife.
Oh, sorry. You should be used to that, though.
Hi, Carol. How are you?
Good.
Is Gloria here?
Yeah, Gloria's here.
All right, Gloria. I should have recognized the hat. Okay.
I want to talk to you about where the Easter house was.
Anyway, Gloria knows this cemetery like the palm of her hand. And she's
injured though.
she's done a lot of work out here and stuff like that. But as we go along, if she has a note that she would like to get across to this group, Gloria, please speak up because she is very knowledgeable about this cemetery. Memorial Day, I'm walking out, going over to the parking lot to get into a car, and I see this lady bent over a footstone. And I recognize the hat. I didn't recognize her derriere or body.
Thank you, really.
That's TMI.
Anyway, she's done a lot of work on this cemetery. Those people that are going to do the presenting, I've mentioned Gloria's name, Gloria Gebhardt, a Brisson, okay? Linda, another Brisson, Linda Cummings, and Linda will start out with you over there. Is George here? George Miron, right over there, George. And his wife, Pat. Carol, I saw you were, yes, Carol Young, her knee Bernier, very instrumental in the starting of Hugo, Minnesota. Her family.
Not Carol. Thank you. I'm right here, but not that.
Well, just so that you know, I'm going to throw a couple names out here. Her father, George Bernier, I used to come up to Minnesota from Arizona and would go over and visit him because he was interested to talk to him. He had been mayor 3 times at least, and maybe 4. Can you hear me okay? Yeah. Anyway, he told me one time, he said, 3 people started Hugo, Minnesota. Euclid Latendresse, gravesite is right over there. Euclid Brisson, you're going to hear a lot from the Brissons today, okay? And Cyril Bernier. They had a farm down on the country, Anoka, Washington county line, wasn't it? But anyway, supposedly from George, he said that those 3 people started Hugo. And if George told me something like that, it was sealed in concrete or chiseled in concrete, gold-plated underwater. It was gospel, okay? You didn't have to question that it was true.
And you know, he never told me that.
He never told you? Mm-hmm. Well, you didn't sit down and talk with him.
Oh, yes, I did before he died. No, but he never said that.
I'll be darned.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
That doesn't mean it wasn't true.
Philip Ether. Philip, I know you got the hat on. Where are you?
I'm right here.
Philip. Oh, okay, good. Philip Ether is going to talk about the Ether family. Jerry Hobble. Jerry, are you going to say a few words? Yeah. Okay. And hopefully Donald Marrier might chip in along the way. Donald?
Right there.
Right there.
Gotcha. Okay. If, as we go through the cemetery, and it's not easy walking in the cemeteries, a lot of undulations and a lot of mole clumps and stuff like that, be careful. When we leave here, after we talk about this stone behind me a little bit, it's not granite, I know that. Anyway, we'll try to walk along that fence over there, and then we're going to get to one of the Cummings grave sites. There's 2, right?
We can just stay at this one, otherwise the other one's way in the back.
Yeah, okay. Where Ray is?
Yeah, we could stay up and
Okay. Well, we're going to be over in that area anyway because somebody else is over there. Burkhardt.
way in the back though.
Yeah. Okay.
Oh, they're up front, I thought. Yeah, they're up front.
Straight down. But it's in that part of the west part of the cemetery. Straight down. Okay. Anyway, if you see something, if you walk by your family's gravesite and you want to say a few words about those that are resting there, please stop us, speak up. Glad to hear it. That's happened more than once. I think that's it. Oh,
Yeah, Bob
Bob
Burkhardt
Joe?
on your list someplace?
Bob Joe's going to talk.
yeah,
Bob Burkhardt.
you're number 2.
Okay.
You never mentioned his name though.
Huh?
You didn't mention him.
Oh, you presenter? Good. Hey, Robert Burkhardt. Better known as Bob Joe, but let me say a few words about this lad right here, okay? He was a year behind me in school, but he was the best altar boy that we had. And I'll tell you why. His father was choir director and his mother was the organist. And I know he was getting the skinny from his parents about what was going to happen during the Easter Mass or something like that, because he's shaking his head yes. Because the good padre, Father Lloyd Thornton, he wasn't very patient, I can tell you that. He had a few rough edges somewhere. But Robert always knew what was going to happen and what was going on. Now, Charlie Miller was the worst because he ran around like a chicken with his head cut off. Agree? Flying around there, you know, making noise, all that kind of stuff. Also, this was an excellent industrial arts student in White Bear. He's probably the best one I ever saw. Pretty was. Well, I remember we both made a table, an end table.
Yes, we still have that.
Out of my heart, Ed Bowles was our teacher. Got enough of that.
Family is also
Ed
here
would
to
put us in a
represent.
project. If you remember, we had to know the tension of a wood screw and a wood nail. And he had us put a whole bunch of that stuff in different kinds of wood, and we had to pull it out from the apparatus that we had. And then how about the time we were in the steam, in that tunnel that had the steam pipe, and we were steaming ash pieces of wood for snowshoes. Do you remember that?
You're talking.
You're in your memory.
Hey, Mike,
You're right.
the Pelicans are here.
Pelican
Present.
family also is here to represent.
Oh, Jennifer. Very good. All right. Anybody have any questions on the shrines that we have over here? Cecilia Meadow is the lady that bought that shrine. Father Thornton, Bob Burkhardt, and I, and Phil Barr, and a few other people. We were in charge of soaking rocks, right? The Padre had a stock tank here full of water, and we were soaking rocks so that when he put the mortar to the rocks, the mortar didn't pull away from the rock itself. And if you look at it, that thing is permanent. Okay. The big shrine down there, Bob, was it you and I that served the first Mass on a Memorial Day?
Might have been.
1954, okay, if you're wondering. If you get a chance, take a look at that big shrine down there. There's an altar down there, but there are also pieces of the church that burned down that he used as an altar stone, and also there's another one down there. There's 2 pieces of stone that he took out of the old church that burned down, or burned, and put them into that altar down there. Walk behind it, the size of the rocks are amazing. I would say they weigh about 800 pounds. They're huge. Anyway, go down and take a look at that. So where are we? We're right here by the flagpole. I was here on Memorial Day, and I will not apologize for the condition of the flag above us.
Now,
Oh,
pretty bad.
All right.
I'm going to go to the Legion. I'm going to talk to somebody. Hard to believe. Stone right here was put in by 3 engineers. Gina, our father was one of them, okay? The other one was a man named Foulke, F-O-U-L-K-E.
Yeah, they put it.
And that was done,
Yeah,
I had a note on it, but I've got so much stuff here, there's no way I can find it. But anyway, we didn't have that for a long time. But in the early 80s, that stone was put in there. And I don't know if they did around the flagpole or not with the rock work. But, this is kind of neat, to be very frank about it. They had put this stone in here, and it kind of gave them a place on Memorial Day, they meaning the American Legion and the veterans, to kind of group around and have a, right, John? You've been involved in it.
do a lot of them at the flagpole
Yeah.
and a huge cemetery.
Well, there's a lot of people in here that this cemetery and that this church, St. John's, meant a lot to them. Okay, George, do you agree? Lorraine, lots of people here. Burkhards, definitely. So, any questions or anything like that? Anybody?
Papers.
Thank you, Philip.
You can call me Phil, you can call me Flip.
Jennifer Pelican, did you want to say anything here, or you want to wait till we get downstream?
Downstream.
Downstream. We're going to go this way to the west, and when we get over there, Jennifer Pelican has some things she wants to present. Linda Cummings has a grave site there that she wants to present her grandparents, Charles Cummings, and then Bob Burkhardt, Robert, then you will start from there, and then we'll regroup. Yeah.
A little bit. Because I don't think I can.
Pelican, Cummings, and then you.
Can you start again? We didn't have the camera on.
Yeah, we don't have everybody here yet either.
Oh, I'm sorry.
They're coming.
They're slow.
It's
Told you it was like herding cats.
well, there's plenty of holes back there to definitely watch where you're walking for sure.
Outside
So.
fence because there's a road there.
Right, there's a road right here. Should we get there?
No, because we're right here.
We're going to be right here.
Oh, okay.
Okay, my name is Jennifer Pelican. I've taken my ancestry full circle from here in Minnesota to Quebec, Canada, La Rochelle, Nîmes, Paris, and Roquefort, France. A documented journey that takes me back to the 15th century, along with some of my family, my sister Melissa behind me. We're here today to honor those that came before me. My family is all around me, actually. Today we're presenting on the Little Valley land that was donated by my great-grandfather. This larger headstone on this side is Maglor Pelican, who is the son of Michel, who's on the just literally on the other side where it just says the name Pelican. Michelle Pelican and Adele Riel are Arel, and here in the cemetery her brother Oliver is as Riley. Michel spent his youth working on the family farmland in Quebec, Canada, specifically Sorel. That's where he learned the skill of purchasing land. Here in Minnesota, in Hugo and Onika Township at the time, he purchased 3 plots of land in 1879. He married Adele in 1881 at St. Genevieve of Senneville. They were the parents of 11 children. Most are buried here. So there are children, lots of babies from one of those children, one of the daughters, and there's significant headstones. She continued to carry children. Back then in Quebec, the tradition was the more you had of kids, the more money you got to sustain your family. Those children I'd like to name because some are not identified, and that is Eleanor Aldo Pelican, William Pelican, and their headstones are on the other side, and Meg Laura, obviously, and Cyril Pelican, and he's in St. Genevieve. Flora, who is a sister. She went by Sister Remy later on. She was a Catholic sister. John Pelican. And Dorothy, who went by the last name Fleur. And Wilfred Pelican, right here, is a veteran first-class seaman, U.S. Navy in World War I. His tours were in Spain, Sicily, and France. Also is Euclid and Edward, and they're also buried in this area where there's flat stones. Adele was the daughter of Pierre Arel and Marie Honorée Nellie Vieillot. Both were born in, and she was born in St. Constance, Quebec. My other pelicans are on the corner as we come out, so I'll speak about them.
Thank you.
Is Eleanor a cousin?
Yeah. Yep, the Brisons, Laternos, are descendants.
We're all related.
The
I'll save my
Vadings.
maternal stuff for the potluck.
So thank you for the
Thank you.
second of the tour. I'll
Good job.
get more.
Linda, you'll take us to your gravesite?
You're still doing a good job. Thank you.
Another Brisson, Linda Nee Brisson Cummings. And one time a couple of years ago, Linda and I were gallivanting down by a festival, and she said, why don't you go up the County Line Road? I want to show you the family house. And so we did, and it's still standing. It's on the county line in Washington County, just past Festival. And it's still a very stately mansion. I often wondered since then where they got all the brick. And who was it, George? Was it you that told me that the brick to your, no, it was your brother Fran told me the brick came from Stillwater, and coming out of Stillwater there was a fairly big hill there, and they had to stop the horses 3 or 4 times and let them rest before they could proceed. Have you got that on there?
No, I don't.
Oh, anyway, I had lunch with Fran on Tuesday. I present Linda Cummings, who is also a very active member of the Hugo Historical Society.
No.
Hugo
Hopkins.
Family history group.
Okay.
Yep.
Family history. You're going to get some history right now. Okay, go ahead.
Okay, well, this is the plot of the patriarch of the Hugo Cummings. His name was Charles Joseph, but he went by CV, and I'll tell you why the V came into play a little bit later. So CV, who is over here, was the second child, but the first son of Prudence Vien Cummings, 1818 to 1910, and Philomise Lavelle, 1834 to 1910. They were both born in Canada, and they were married in Canada on July 4th, 1854. They had 10 children in all, and both of them died in Minnesota in 1910, and they are buried over at St. Mary's Catholic Cemetery in Minneapolis. I know their first child, Ida, and CV were both born in Canada, but I'm not sure about all the others. At some point, the whole family came to Minnesota and settled in St. Paul. Several of Prudent's sons, including CV, owned a wallpaper hanging company in St. Paul, and a number of the children lived not on Summit Avenue, but on some of the side streets on Summit Avenue. And my husband Ray and I one time found a couple of the addresses and went and looked at them. Nice big homes. And then during the time they owned that company, the paper hanging company, they did change their name from Vient, V-I-E-N-T, excuse me, to Cummings, which is basically the verb to come. So at some point, CV came to Hugo, met and fell in love with Catherine Melvina Bellon, 1863 to 1953, and Kate is the daughter of Pierre Bellon and Louise Lucie Bibot. Kate and CV were married on May 19, 1884. So they bought the land over on Homestead, which Mike was talking about, and they owned 85 acres. And all of the land was put into Kate's name. And I believe that that was so in case the paper hanging company went bankrupt, they wouldn't lose their land. So here's a picture of the house that is still there. And this is Kate and Vianne's 10 children, but a lot of them were married at that time. And so there's children here and everything else. So this right here is CV. This is my husband's grandfather, Irvin. And we're back over there, and Kate is right behind. The story about Kate is that she never spoke English. Now, I don't know how all of her children were going through school, and she never spoke. Maybe she didn't spoke it, but I think she understood it. So CV was not much of a farmer, but he was a real entrepreneur. So for a while he worked, and he was a railroad engineer, and he would take a train up north to Duluth, but about halfway up there, he got off that train, got on a southbound train, and then drove the other train back here. I'm not really sure why that happened, but that's what he did. But his steam engine expertise came in handy a little bit later. He purchased a threshing machine run also on a steam engine, and he had that, and during the fall, he would take it around to all the farmers, and he would help them thresh all of their grains. And also the steam engine was used to plow logs, to saw the logs. And during the winter, when they would go to the lakes around here and they would cut the ice, and they'd use hand saws to cut all the ice, but they would use the steam engine to get a conveyor belt that would take those heavy blocks of ice and get it up onto a flatbed truck to bring the ice to wherever it was going to go. And CV built a little shack when they were out on the ice around the steam engine, so if anyone fell into the water while they were cutting ice, they could go into the little hut-like thing he had there, and they would warm up and get dry and then go back out to cut more ice. All right, so
I can't see myself falling in the lake, getting dried off, and going back to saw ice. I see me going straight home.
well, they did.
Ice or no ice.
So CV and Kate are over here, but I want to talk to you about a couple of other people on this plot. So one of them is Louis, I think he's right here, and his wife Blanche. And I believe over here is one of their children who died at 3 years old. But I really want to focus on these two right here. So this is Fred. His name was Alfred. He was the sixth child of CV and Kate. And this is his wife, Mary. Now, Mary is a Pelican. Mary Pelican, and I don't know who her parents were. Did you know, Robert?
Edwige, I think. Edwige, maybe?
I don't know. Anyway, I don't know who her parents are, but...
I have my computer. Later on we can go deep.
Okay.
Well, it says Mary Cummins Cartier.
Well, yeah, we'll get to that.
Married again?
She was Mary Pelican Cummings. And her husband Fred, her husband Fred died in 1918 of the Spanish flu, and that left Mary as a 24-year-old widow with two children, Irene and Alfred. And Irene is Robert's mother, and also, if some of you remember Charlie Surecki, who was in our group, it's his mother too, and you had a sister Carol, correct? Yeah. So anyway, Mary had several suitors, and she rebuffed one of them, and he later came back to her house, shot her, and then shot himself. So he died, but Mary didn't die, but she became paralyzed for the rest of her life. And so she was in a wheelchair. And she lived in the little house right next door to the Interstate Lumber Company. And when Charlie, and I don't know if you, Robert, would come and visit her in the summertime, she would be out on the front steps in her wheelchair. So when Irene was 14 years old, she went down to Winona to, I got to get my notes from you, Robert. She went down to Winona to go to high school down there, and she stayed with Irene's, no, who did she stay with? with with Mary's sister Jessie Peliquin and her husband Tom Peltier. So she stayed down there, went to high school, finished high school, and while she was down there, she met, is it Irvin? Irvin Sarecki, got married down there, and she stayed pretty much her whole life down there until later in life.
5 kids.
5 kids. Oh,
actually 6. One of them died.
Oh, okay. So anyway, but then apparently, and I'm not sure, I'm going to get this in the correct order. But Mary did get married again to Michael Cartier. And,
Mitchell.
Pardon?
Mitchell. We called him Mitchell.
Okay, well, I only knew Michael, sorry.
Okay.
Anyway, at some point in time, because the 2 children were gone, they moved to Coos Bay, Oregon, and then there Michael died. So then she was left alone. She really couldn't take care of herself. She was becoming quite despondent. And so Robert, her grandson, and your wife drove a car out to Oregon and ended up getting all of her furniture and everything, putting it in a U-Haul truck, and they brought her back here where she stayed down in Winona and lived with her daughter Irene for the rest of her life. Now when Mary died, she had donated her body to the University of Minnesota for
science.
Just for
science research.
Yeah. And so after that was all done, Robert and his wife went and got her ashes and then brought her up here for a Christian burial. So that's why Mary is here and why she has a different last name. So yeah, a very interesting story, at least I thought so. And Robert just told me some of it, so anyway, so now I think we'll just stay up here instead of going down to the other. All right, so the other Cummings family that I'm going to talk about, we're way back over there in the northwest section of the, Irving, whose picture I showed you, he was the youngest son, the 10th son of C.V. and Catherine. And he was born in 1896, died in 1888, again the youngest child. He married Mamie Margaret Cardinal. She was born in 1898 and died in 1960. And they had 3 children, Willard, June, and Loretta. Irving was for at least 35 years the rural route post guy who gave everybody in the rural route area all of their mail. And he did that for about 35 years.
At least.
Yeah. And so because he was so used to sitting in the center of his vehicle, getting with his left foot, whenever he and Mamie went somewhere, he was in the center of the car and she was over here on the passenger side because he didn't know how to drive the car otherwise. It's crazy. And Mike told me this story that in the wintertime, CV would have wheels on the back of his car, but they put skis on the front. And so he could, come hell or high water or whatever the post office, it is. So he would come and he would just go through the snow with the skis on the front. So then the oldest son of Irving and Mamie was Willard Cummings. And Willard was born in 1918 and he died in 1976. So Willard was in the Navy. He was a PC-3. I don't know what that means, Mike. In the Navy.
Seaman 3rd class.
Okay, but he actually was discharged from the Navy in the summer of 1941. And he was going to leave and come home. So Ivana, his wife, she was Ivana Bertha Brenner. She was the daughter of Ivan Cottrell and Amanda Brenner. And she was up here, they had gotten married, and she was pregnant. And when he was discharged from the Navy, he was a welder, and so they needed some welders, so they asked him to become a civilian and be working with the Navy. So he decided to do that, so he sent back here to Minnesota, gave Ivana a train ticket, and she took the train out to Vallejo, California, where they stayed for about 5 or 6 years. And while they were there, and of course we know what happened on December 7th, 1941, but Ray was born, Raymond Cummings, their first child, was born on December 15th of 1941. So anyway, then that brings me to Ray, was also my husband. Ray was born in 1941, and he passed away in 2013. Ray was also in the Air Force. He was an A1C, and I don't know what that means, but...
Airman first class.
Okay. He was an airman first class, and he was in during Vietnam, though he was never stationed over in Vietnam. However, he came out and he had a real good, what do they call that bill? Something bill? GI Bill. And so he got his PhD. And then after he got his PhD from the University of Minnesota, we were already married, he became a captain in the Army Reserves, and he used that money to get his private pilot license. So he was, utilized that for good use. Anyway, Ray and I were married 45 years, and then he passed away. And I have my name back there, but I hope that just stays my name for a while. But anyway, so that is like the 4 generations of the Cummings family in Hugo: Charles, Irving, Willard, and Raymond.
Nice.
Thank you. Just a little aside.
Yes.
You know, the Mary that lived by the one in the wheelchair, she made mittens and scarves, and I used to go up there with money every fall, and my mother would purchase all these mittens and things for all of us 6 kids.
Okay, we
And
didn't
so
know that.
she did a lot of that.
Okay, was it
she
crocheting
in a
or
wheelchair and
knitting?
she made
We had a lot of
all
mittens in
kinds
the
of
house.
All right. Great. Thank you.
Go ahead.
I have been, I'm Gloria, and I've been working out at the cemetery for a long time, and I've noticed a lot of things about the cemetery. There's basically about 1,500 souls out in this area right now, and it has room for a lot more. There was questions about, are we getting filled up, and the answer is no. But I wanted you to note basically the organization of this family plot. They start out, they sell family plots, and for many years, and there's a headstone, there's a place for a headstone, and there's generally 8 spots for people.
Headstones.
Yeah, and there's an extra one over here, but technically you can have 2 people in each spot. But this is one of the more traditional ones. You're going to see this mainly in this part of the cemetery, a lot of this kind of formation. Now when you go across the street, or across the gravel road into the newer section, you're going to find what looks like organized chaos at times. People are all over the place. They'll have different stones on the ground, or sometimes there's even 2 headstones or an individual headstone. But just make a note in your mind how each plot is differently organized, and that's pretty much up to the family. The church has said they organize the burials, but they don't do anything with the stones. That's totally up to the family. So just look at some of the different things that go on in the cemetery, and remember, see how some of these are sinking? You might, as a family, might want to start thinking about trying to raise some of these stones before they sink away altogether.
Yeah. You can't hardly see any of the names on
Calvary is really reasonable about that. They charge you $25 to raise a marker.
That's wonderful. It doesn't happen here. There is no provision for raising the stones. But these were all cleaned up about 2 years ago. They were scraped back and everything, and look at how they've grown in already. Yeah. So think about having them raised.
Right. So Gloria has been phenomenal in getting all kinds of information. If you go on, can you go on the website right now?
Not yet.
Okay. So what she is doing is, after next week. So what she is doing is she's putting all kinds of extra information onto the website, which you will eventually be able to get to. And so it's all about the family. So that's why I knew that Mamie Margaret Cardinal, I knew her family, her parents, because Gloria has put all that in, and she has done a lot of that through her own research. So kudos to Gloria. what a fantastic thing. So you can go in there eventually and find out. And I actually changed some of the information and updated it and for her too. So you can always go in there eventually and look at that and then make up any corrections. Because she's just doing it this on her own time.
Good Neighbor Days is next weekend. I'm going to put a plug in here.
Yes.
The Hugo History Commission is going to be over in, what building is that? Peterson?
Pedersen.
Pedersen building over there. We're going to be there. I'm going to be having some alphabetical lists of people and maps of the cemetery. And if you want to come over, we can look up your family name. I can give you the information like I gave Linda here, and I'll have a map of the cemetery, and I can show you where they're actually located. So, Friday, Saturday and Sunday, Good Neighbor Days, the Pedersen building, air conditioned.
And bingo.
And bingo.
All right.
Okay.
All right. We're done here.
Good
Awesome.
job, Linda.
Nice job, Linda.
Okay,
I don't know how he was related to Napoleon. I figured that
I
out.
don't know. Okay. Well,
Everybody
Napoleon
ready?
and my great-grandfather were brothers
You're like an elementary teacher.
of a different family.
Hand up. No,
There was the first bunch of twins, and there's the second bunch. Okay.
All right. Our next presenter is Robert Burkhardt. He was commonly known here in Hugo as Bob Joe. And if you were living in Hugo,
Yours are fine. I can get right over you.
had a nickname. Bob Joe, Mickey, whatever, okay? Just
Can we
live
call you
with
Mickey?
it. Just live with it, right?
Can we call you Mickey?
Yeah, oh yeah.
Sure.
Take it away, Bob.
Anyway, I've asked Bob to come and talk about his family, just kind of quickly. His family, starting with Louis and Rose, and then his father, Bob and Dorothy, they were very, very instrumental in anything that went on in Hugo, be it sewer, be it water, be it the church choir director, the choir, and what was your mother?
Organist.
Choir.
Organist.
Huh?
Organist.
There you go.
Dad was
Can't hear.
But anyway, he lives in Island Lake, Minnesota, up north. But he was very eager to come down, tell the story. I've asked him to introduce his family that are here because there's a number of the Burkhardts here. So please, Bob, I'm out of your way.
Thank you, Mick. I guess I'm going to start with family. My brother, John. My sister, Rose, is the third oldest of 6 children. And Debbie is here. She's the 6th of the people. There she is. There's Rose, and there's John. But I'm going to just take it chronologically. Joe Burkhardt lived in Europe, and he and his 2 brothers came over to the U.S. as immigrants in about 1870 maybe. And he lived in White Bear. I had a little artifact, but I forgot to bring it, that advertised that he was a horseshoe maker and he shod horses.
Farrier.
Farrier. Very good. Very good. Anyway, Joe Burkhardt moved to Hugo. And when he moved to Hugo, the Burkhardt house was north of the church. The first house is Mingo, and then their house on Highway 61 on the east side, and on the west side was the railroad track. And anyway, Louis Burkhardt was the son of Joe Burkhardt, and probably about 1910 he started being a mail carrier. And when he was a mail carrier, he had 2 teams of Broncos. One team for the morning, and it made part of the circle around Hugo, and the other team in the afternoon made the circle on the others, what was left. The person who just spoke was talking about mail carriers, and I don't know, I think when he retired, probably about 1930, 38, someplace after 30, from being a mail carrier. Then he went to I think the Cummings people. Willard Cummings. Irving Cummings. Okay, I didn't remember the name. But anyway, when you were a mail carrier, if somebody on your route was sick and they couldn't go into town to get groceries, they would come out and give Louis, my grandfather, a list of groceries to pick up and bring them out the next day.
Okay.
Well, you know, a little bit of that spreads around the neighborhood pretty good. So when Louis retired, he opened up a bar and restaurant in Hugo, which was just a little further north, or closer to the grocery store. And anyway, they opened up not that grocery store, but when he retired from being a mail carrier, that was his, you know, the stuff that people really knew of him because of what he did for the people that lived in the surrounding area out in the township, which at that time was Onika Township. And when Louis Burkhardt, probably around 1936, took a trip, I don't think they took the train, about 100 miles north of here, and bought 11 acres on Island Lake. And that's near the town of Sturgeon Lake and Moose Lake. And anyway, that's where I bought land, 40 acres across the road from that property. That had lakeshore, so we still own it, and we still pay the good taxes for that thousands of piece of lakeshore that Louis Burkhardt bought. And anyway, I'll get to the other part further down on my list. But Louis Burkhardt opened up Burkhardt's Restaurant, Bar and Restaurant, on the east side of Highway 61. There used to be a big parking lot there, but I don't think that's there anymore. And the original fire department had a one-stall building next to that property where they had the one fire engine for Hugo, and they would, a lot of card playing got done in that place. And as a kid, I remember, I'm talking when I was a really young kid, some of the old timers in town, they were there playing. I don't remember if it was Buck Euchre or what it was, but
Louis Kitchley.
Now Louis Kitchley owned the big bar and restaurant between Burkhardt's, a little bit south of Burkhardt's restaurant and north of the church. And people would, I think, come out on the railroad from the Twin Cities because that was where you could get Louis Kitchley's place a really good steak. And they would have a few drinks and maybe play some,
Slot machines.
slot machines. Because the story is that we had a slot machine in Burkhardt's restaurant, and they would hold on to me, and I would grab onto the handle, and then they would let me go. And that was supposed to be good luck to get on the slot machine.
Almost more fun.
I love it.
Well, anyway, World War II came along, and their son, Bob Burkhardt, Robert E. Burkhardt, who's buried here, right over there, he went to White Bear High School. No, he didn't go to White Bear High School. He went to Hugo School. And when he got to be high school age, he went to St. John's out in by St. Cloud, and he went to those years, maybe 4 years there, and then to the college for 3 years, three and a half years. Never got his degree. And boy, was that ever meant that when I started college, you getting that degree, that's what my mother told me. You're not going to be able to get out of getting a degree. Well, anyway, that's another story. When Bob Burkhardt grew to be a young man, and he was working as a metallurgist at the St. Paul Foundry, and you can go to St. Paul and you see the manhole covers in the middle of the street. Well, they made those at that foundry. And as a, I don't know, probably 8, 9, 10-year-old, I would go with my dad, who was the metallurgist for St. Paul Foundry, and see how it was done. Well, one of the things I remember living in that house on Highway 61 had no water, no sewer. We had an outhouse in the back, and my grandfather's, there was a shed, and that was his blacksmith shop. And anyway, as time went on, the building that was the old Burkhardt house was raised, and that's where the bank stands now. And anyway, I was living there with my mother and dad, Bob Burkhardt, Bob Sr., and the church caught fire one day, and he was up on the roof with Mike's dad. What was his name? Connie Creever, fighting that fire. You know, that you shouldn't have been up on the roof. They weren't well enough trained. But anyway, they were up there fighting that fire. And, well, later on things got better. Father Fortin was a chaplain during World War II in Europe. And he's the one that did a lot of the stuff in this cemetery. A lot of the shrines and stuff. So that was Lloyd Fortin. And then of course they had to rebuild the church, which took years to pay off. and rebuilt it. And at that church then, Lloyd Fortin had the skills, he was a smart man, to rebuild organs. And when a church was going to get rid of their organ, he would go and get it and bring it back. And Mother played on several of those organs that he rebuilt in the church, and that's still there and still in use in the Hugo church. That was all stuff done by Lloyd Fortin.
Nice to hear. Yeah,
Lloyd Fortin had a nice wood shop in the basement rectory next to the church. And I wanted to make something for my mother for Mother's Day, and Lloyd helped me make a nice trellis. We took about a 1 by 10 and cut strips in it, not quite all the way, and bent them out into a fan-shaped trellis. But that was Lloyd Fortin for you. He welded and built the rail, communion rail in the church, maybe with the help of the blacksmith in Hugo. And what was his name? Somebody can help me.
Papa Gene Peltier.
Gene Peltier. Okay. And he worked with Gene on that, forming the communion rail at the church. Gene Peltier, he took it upon himself. He thought we needed a nice cross here in the church. And he took an old, like that one that's standing over there, he took an old windmill and welded up, as high as windmills go, a big cross. Well, Fortin, he didn't want anything to do with that. And that, you know, he never encouraged them or anything, but that is not here. I think that's the only cross maybe that's there. And Lloyd Fortin was very big on having everything out of wood. You go into St. John's Church today, and I haven't been there in quite a while, but there are a lot of statues, and he had somebody that could carve wood carvings and do a lot of those statues. Well, anyway, he knew that Mother was a tremendous pianist, and he got my mother, Dorothy, to be the organist. And she got my dad, who had quite a bit of musical training, he was a violin player, to be the director of the Hugo Church, for the Hugo Church, of the choir. Well, Lloyd Fortin didn't want any women in the choir, and so we had only men, and my dad had an all-men choir. Mom played in the church for maybe 40 years, so that was quite a long time until she just couldn't, her hands wouldn't, the arthritis, you know, wouldn't take care of it very much. So anyway, during that time I was an altar boy for Lloyd Fortin. And I was an altar boy until I was a sophomore or junior no, I don't think a junior in college. And I would come back for the big holidays, like Easter week, stuff like that. And Lloyd Fortin, even though he had this really kind of short attention span, but he had a short temper.
That's saying it mildly.
So when I was, and he named me to be a master of ceremonies of those that week, like Holy Week, other times like Christmas and stuff. So I would be in charge of bringing the acolytes, there were 4 acolyte servers, into the back of the sanctuary, sacristy, and bring them back out when it was time for them to be out before communion. So Lloyd Fortin did a lot of the work. Whenever you see these rather elaborate, and I think there's 3 of them here, built out of stone. And I know that Mick Creever and we were here helping him build those. And we had a mass at that one over there is an altar. So anyway, he built all those, and then he built some more over by the church. Bob Burkhardt was instrumental in a lot of things here. When we were at his funeral, there was a young man called Gene Thornquist, and he said, you know, that guy right there laying in the casket, he did a lot for Hugo. He's responsible. Dad was named to represent Hugo at Metropolitan Council, Met Council it was called, which were the cities around Minneapolis, St. Paul, and they must have had Minneapolis and St. Paul at the Met Council meetings. And they would talk about water systems, sewer systems. They were talking about a sewer system that would take care of all these places. And I believe the sewer system we have today is probably a part of that Met Council deal with the pipeline that goes up toward White Bear and takes care of the sewage. So those of you from Hugo, that when you flush the toilet,
Okay.
that's something you want to think about.
Every time.
They didn't have sewer systems back in those days. But, so I was starting to get to be through high school at about this time, and I graduated from high school in 1958, so we're starting to get a little time stamp of when that stuff happened. The sewer system came after the water system, and the water system used to be down in the corner of the park here. And I digress a little bit. My grandfather, Louis Burkhardt, he must have been the mail carrier. He must have done pretty well, and he owned some land. And that's when he and Mark Hugo donated these 4 acres, or not acres, 4 blocks of land for this park. And so when my dad was superintendent of water here in Hugo, first water superintendent, and that used to have a water tower in that corner, not actually the corner, but in that section of the park. And he would let the water run out, and it would flood the rink that would go around. And yeah, I see some people saying, yeah, that's how it went. And then the next day, if we had nice cold weather, we would have nice, new, clean ice to skate on. Anyway, I graduated from White Bear High School in about 1958. But leading up to that, Dad was the chairman of the school board when we had the little school, grade school, the 4-room grade school. And it was about that time, and then all of the kids as we got older would go to White Bear for high school and junior high. So I think Dad was pretty instrumental in getting Hugo School a part of the White Bear district through a consolidation of the school. So Dad, yeah, I said he wasn't an elected official, he was the city clerk. And he was named to go to by the city council of Hugo, to go to the Met Council meetings. And that's where he steered a lot of the sewer, water system, those things in the direction they needed to be steered. But the biggest thing was that Bob Burkhardt did a lot for the development of Hugo because of those things and the fire department. So the fire department did get a new truck, and it moved out of the little drive space by the old garage next to the Burkhardt restaurant. Well, that's about it for that. But when he was superintendent of water, he got me a summer job, and I think that was my junior year. I worked, and they would dig up the street and lay the water pipe in there, and then instead of digging up people's lawns to get it from that pipe to their house, we got a piece of equipment that would have 4-foot sections and bore into the house. And then we charged $1.50 a foot to bore it in so they didn't have to dig up their lawn. Well, I got pretty good at that. And we would dig it up, and we would go in the house and we'd cut a hole in the floor, in the basement floor, and I would aim for that hole. We would measure things out so I would have an idea of where to go. And we would drill that right into that hole that they had dug in the house.
They still do that sometimes.
And it was so successful that after a while nobody was taking $1.25 a foot thing when they would dig it in. Everybody was taking $1.50 and having it run in underground. So I did that for the summer, and then I went back to college. Well, anyway. Yeah, so Robert Burkhardt was the coach of the Hugo baseball team. Somebody here mentioned to me that Hugo had a really good baseball team. Well, yeah, that's, my dad lettered in that in college and in high school. I remember seeing his pile of J's from St. John's, and it was about 4 inches high because he had lettered in 4 things. I'm getting signals from my family to end this. And so I will. Thank you very much for your attention. And I am, as Gene Thorkus told me, very proud of my dad, who did very much for the way the city of Hugo has developed.
Yeah, keep in mind one thing. It was the village of Hugo, and that was 1 square mile. And when Mr. Burkhardt got done with the Metropolitan Commission and all that, it became 6 square miles, or 36 miles square. Are you with me?
6 by 6.
That was a big thing, and Hugo became the city of Hugo and not the village of Hugo. Agree?
That's right.
That was a
forgot
big
that
thing.
part.
There was money from the federal government and stuff like that coming in, and of course increasing the area included an awful lot of farmers and stuff like that that were outside of the square mile of Hugo. You'd agree with that?
And my dad and some of the members of the city council would go out into the farmland and lobby, because this was a vote of if you wanted to become city of Hugo instead of Onika Township. And they would lobby, you know, Hugo can't take care of you with all the fire department and water, you know, where you have to have a well. I don't know how far that extends today out into the township. But that all happened. It's a big deal when my dad was on the city council. He was never on the city council.
Bob? Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Sorry I went longer than I
There's
should have.
Donald Marrier, and Donald got a hold of me and said Patrick would like to say a few words about the Ether. Huh?
Who's Patrick?
You are.
I'm Flip. I'm
Oh,
Flip.
okay.
Too many people call me Steven, even if they didn't know my brother.
Well, I knew of the 3 Ethiers that were in and out of Hugo. Bert was the barber, okay?
We'll get to you.
I know you will. Steve was his brother, and then George Ethier. And they would come in and out of Hugo and visit the Ethier family, which would be Albert and Clara. But I wanted to mention that Albert Ethier, I think all 3 of them were in the military during World War I. Is that true? But Albert got over to France, who was the barber in Hugo.
And I think one of the others got over to France, but didn't get involved in fighting, and I think that Steve never left the continent. I'm not sure. But they were all in the Army for the duration, and Delvina was the president of the Women's Association or whatever.
Well, the fact that Bert could talk French, he never did anything but drive officers around in France. He never was in the trenches or anything like that. And he was always quite thankful of that. Those of us that got haircuts from him and stuff like that, Bob Burkhardt,
Yep.
we would hear different stories from Bert. But will introduce you here. Philip Ethier.
Yes.
You got it.
Okay, so we're going to clip through this pretty quick. I was warned not to go on and on like I did with him on the telephone. So I have my computer with me, and when we get back over to the City Hall, anybody that wants to go deep on either my family or probably yours, I've got a lot of stuff there. All right, so right away to explain the name. The name in Quebec is Etier, with an S sound that nobody in France would ever put in that word. And nobody in France recognizes that as a word anymore, because it all died out over there. I haven't done research to find out how long. I have some record that suggests that someone was born with the name in 1940. All right, Etier, iconic Quebec name. Leonard Etier came from France to Montreal in 1670. Virtually every Etier and Ethier in the world is his descendant. There's 8,000 of us in Canada, 2,000 of us in the U.S., and nowhere else, even in France. Plus, the folks whose surnames were changed to Hickey, Hackey, Akey, or some other phonetic interpretation of the Quebec pronunciation. Now, our story today begins in the church in Saint-Lin, Quebec, on 26 September 1848. There was a wedding between Joseph Etier and Eloise Sofroni Etier. This is not a misprint. They were the great-grandchildren of Jean-Baptiste Etier and Marie Rosalie Duprat. They were also the great-grandchildren of Pierre Allard and Marie Archange Malone. Two brothers married two sisters. Okay, Eloise and Joseph had several children in St. Alexis after that. Joseph Emile Etier was born 10 March 1855. Don't pay attention to that, it's wrong. They got the March 10th part right, but that's the wrong year. The error didn't start to creep in until somewhere around 1900 or so, where the records start to change the reporting of his age. All right, he was baptized in 1855 in St. Alexis. I presume that he was called by his middle name Emile because so many of his Etier relatives were named either Joseph or Jean-Baptiste. I don't know what's wrong with Eve, I don't know what's wrong with Claude, but it was Joseph and Jean-Baptiste over and over. If he knew his parents were double second cousins, it might have increased his desire to leave that part of Quebec. It has not been reliably recorded when he arrived here in Onika. Sometime in or around, someone in or around the Etier household reported in 1881 that the family, including Emile, was living in Saint-Lin, where our story begins. There are other records that show various other earlier arrivals, but none of those records was made before 1900. He may have had reasons to imply that he had been here earlier than he actually was. Or the census takers have been getting information from people who were just guessing. I have not found any contemporaneous records that place him here before 1881. He seems to be the last of my father's ancestors to arrive here in Minnesota. That's when he met Delvita. Antoine Boisvert and Marguerite Vadnai were from Quebec. Their daughter, Catherine Delvina Boisvert, was born in Little Canada on 12 April 1866. She was baptized by Father Goffin, who they talk a lot about over in Canada, on 22 April 1866. She never seemed interested in calling herself Catherine. The records I have seen have some very creative ways to misspell Delvina, and the craziest is Luna. All right, so they were married on 16 April 1883 and proceeded to have children. So we're just going to go through the children. We'll leave the grandchildren for over there. All right, Emelina, 1884. She was later Mrs. Nessier-Brisson and then Mrs. Albert Darwin. I have a pack of DNA matches to Darwin, folks. She passed in 1959 and is buried here. Mary Ethier, in 1888. Okay, here's where it gets weird, folks. Yeah, Mary wed older widower Daniel Joseph Akey, who was born in Quebec. See where this is going?
Yeah, the Akey part.
Daniel's father was apparently born an Etier and later known as Earl Frank Akey. In 1970, I rode with my parents to the Kelly farm in Wisconsin to visit my dad's Aunt Alice. On the way, we stopped off to visit Aunt Mary, and I met Clifford Emil Akey, her son. He was very proud of working for the university. He had large wooden cabinets with padlocks on them, and he was unlocking them one after another to show me his huge collection of books. Aunt Mary only lasted a couple of years past our visit. She and Clifford are buried in Roxbury, Dane County, Wisconsin. Then we come to Edward Harry Ethier in 1890. He was married at least 3 times, and Hickey pops up vaguely in some records revolving him. Not quite sure how that happened. He's buried in Garfield, Douglas County, Minnesota. I don't know why right now, but I think he actually died here in the cities. Then, Stephen Ethier, 1892. My Grandpa Ethier was wrong about 2 things. First, that he was part Indian. He thought he had an Indian nose, and he thought most French Canadian people were part Indian. And neither of those things are true. Our nose, skip my dad. It's a Roman nose. France is full of them. My dad was part Native on his mother's side. Cecilia Paul's grandmother, Cecile Hamlin, was Métis. She came here with her Métis father from Manitoba, almost certainly part of him having signed on as an ox cart company. Now, I don't know if the reason that he didn't go back was because that was the year that Dakota declared war on the Ojibwe. It might happen that way. Some carters, the ox carts, were foolish enough to attack a Dakota hunting party somewhere. And Dakota didn't take kindly to that. So pretty soon, those ox carts were targets. And if that was the year that that happened, and you were in St. Paul and you heard by the grapevine that the Dakota were up for your kind, and you'd already got your money, your stuff was on the steamboat, you had your cash, and you were afraid to go home, what do? You look for people who speak French. That's what you do. All right. His other thing that he had messed up was that his name was Stephen with a V. He named my dad Orville Stephen with a V. Here. When my brother was born, my parents were perplexed at how to spell his name, as his maternal grandfather was Stephen Francis Kavanaugh, and his paternal grandfather was Stephen Ethier with a V. But because Irish tradition said that you should name the firstborn son after his father's father, they went with the V, not yet knowing there was no actual conflict. His name was spelled with a PH. All right, then we come to Albert Benjamin Etier. My dad's Uncle Bert is remembered Hugo as Bert the Barber. He passed away in 1973, and he's right here, along with his wife, Clara. We met starts with an O. All right, George Mabel Ethier. Uncle George beat my dad at marrying Irish. He married Irene Emily O'Connor. George and Irene were buried at Fort Snelling in 1975, 1987, respectively. Finally, we come to Alice. Remember Alice? No. Yeah, okay. Do you remember Alice's restaurant, right? Alice, remember Alice? Okay. Oh, here we go. Marie Elise Ethier, born in 1900. She became Mrs. Girton and then Mrs. Kelly. I'm a little fuzzy about the transition between Mrs. Girton to Mrs. Kelly. Now, Walter Kelly was apparently a widower, and he had a farm, and she was working there as a housekeeper, presumably while she was still married to Girton. Girton didn't die, so I'm not exactly sure how this works out. But at some point, I believe in 1936, she married Walter Kelly. All right, so Walter Kelly had actually been gone 5 years when I was on the farm in 1970. And Alice was really cool. I repaired a motorcycle on the property. She let me ride it. Then we went to watch some family members in the rock band. They were in a local thing. So she lasted until 1987. She's buried in Roxbury. Somewhere in the aughts, Antoine moved almost all of the Boisvert family to Legal, Alberta. Spelled just like the English word legal. And Legal is a francophone town that the government started and named after a bishop in the neighborhood who I think was still alive at the time. It's north of Edmonton. I had no idea about this. I discovered this through a DNA match when I got a message from a guy named Denis Chalifot, who still lives in Legal, and said, okay, why am I related to this guy? And a quick run through history pops up, Boisverts, and well, Antoine, he brought the whole family. I mean, people that were already married and everything. I'm sure that they asked Delphina, hey, how about if you and Emil, you know, pack up and go with us to Legal, Alberta? And I think she said, no, you know, we're not going to do that. So Emil passed in February of 1923. In August, at St. John the Baptist Church, Delvina married widower Frank Heaney. My dad always called him Grandpa Heaney, and I was never sharp enough as a kid to ask him, who the heck is Grandpa Heaney? You know, I couldn't figure that out. There were some other folks we could talk about later. Now, they actually lived with Steve Ethier and his wife Cecilia Paul in the house on Prosperity Avenue in St. Paul where my dad was born. Frank had been on the St. Genevieve committee to shake down the locals to build the church at Centerville Station. I mean, here's the chair of the committee, and here's all these members of the committee, and they all have real French names for first and last. And right at the top of the list below the chair, we get Frank Heaney. And he goes like, what? The St. Genevieve records go on to report that Frank Heaney was later the first mayor of Hugo when it became a village in 1906. And I just like, my head exploded. It's like, my great-grandmother, her husband was hardly cold to the ground, married the guy that used to be the mayor? It's like, okay, that's crazy. All right, so Frank died here, and he's buried here. I don't think that Frank and Margaret, his first wife, I had all kinds of ideas of how Frank got here, and all of them were blown out of the water when I found the record that he had a wife named Margaret who was born in Ireland. So none of those things made sense anymore. So when Delvina passed away in December of 1939, there were no Heaneys around to object when the Ethier family placed her marker here as Delvina Ethier. Okay, now we have a couple others back here that we'll have to go deep on so I can explain to you who they are, because they weren't part of my skeletonized thing here so that I could get through my schedule. So if you have any quick questions, fine. Otherwise, we can do it back at the City Hall.
Give us your conclusion.
The conclusion?
Yeah.
The conclusion is kind of weird. If you think about it, is why did Emil come here? Why did he use the E and call himself Emil instead of Emil? That's kind of a funny thing. And apparently, nobody here was aware that his first name was actually Joseph. Maybe they weren't even aware that there's so damn many Josephs back there, that this would happen. So it's kind of interesting that both of these people went through their lives, at least their lives here in Onika, maybe for him back in Quebec, being known by their middle name, just because in his case first name was so common. Why Delvina didn't want to be Catherine, I haven't got a clue on that. But this is kind of where it went, and this is why the whole place here is not littered with Bovaers, because they all packed up and went to where? North of Edmonton? Seriously? Don't even know why that town was created, but the government wanted a francophone town up there, and they built one.
Philip?
Nice job.
Thank you.
You bet.
Donated, and later there is a contract of deed that shows it was sold to the church. That's why there are two monuments on the outside of his headstone. And the smaller, shorter one is his wife, Julia Tart, and actually she was a Latart, and it got shortened when they came to America. So, Jean Lavalley was born in Saint-Pierre-de-Sorel, Quebec. He immigrated to Minnesota in 1858, and Julia Tart was born in Ira, Michigan. Jean would use the farming skills of his youth in Canada to acquire land in Onika Township. They would have 15 children, only 10 would survive to adulthood. Julia Tatro, Josephine Boisvert, Jean Lavalley, Joseph Lavalley, Louise Lavalley, Marie Maria Brizon, Edis Brizon, Alexis LaValle, Agnes Demers, Armenia LaValle, Libby Lee, Edward LaValle, Adele Peltier, and there is a baby as well, LaValle. Jean was the son of also Jean LaValle and Francois Millet of St. Pierre de Sorel, Quebec. Julia was a daughter of Christopher Tart and Sarah Long of later of White Bear Lake, and her mother died in Centerville. Back behind me and to our, where all the flowers are, and there's a Virgin Mary, is William LaValle Sr. and Adele Lacoste. They were married in 1892 in Centerville, Minnesota. Their family would incorporate LaValle Motor Company in 1927 and hold much of the farmland across the village of Hugo. They were very active in civic and parish events, including donation of the very land we are standing on between the two families. They would have 9 children: William LaValle Jr., Eva Peltier, Roman LaValle, Alice Jerry, Raymond LaValle, Felix LaValle, Alexander LaValle, and Agnes Mariere. And the Mariere comes into my family later as Oliver Peliquin sells the grocery store he had to that family. And that's it for these headstones.
Nice, thank you.
I do have my Peliquins on the very far corner that I'd like to stop at the end.
If you can stop there and look at my computer to see how I tie in this belt. I do.
I think everybody does. I go by everybody. Vanez.
Going back to those middle names, did you see that? We've got a Peliquins, I think. One of the relatives. They had like 14 girls. They all had the same first name. So they obviously
was it Marie?
Yeah, Marie. It's tradition that if possibly the child, I learned when I was in Quebec, is that if they possibly were going to die, before they were baptized, they were given Marie, was like a blessing before they were baptized, possibly in the home. So the priest up there usually had to travel.
Well, these girls all survived that.
Yeah. But some carried on, you know, whether they carried that Marie here into the United States or not, some dropped it.
Now, the 2 sisters that created the double second cousins there, they were both, their first name was Marie. Like
Was
Marie Celeste and Marie
Theodore
Rose.
in your family, Lou?
No, he's actually like 4 times removed
Because
from my line.
Lorraine Mar, your gad boy, didn't your father buy this store from Theodore Peliquin? Yes.
I think it's Theodore, isn't it?
Oliver.
Well, Oliver had the store first, and then one of Oliver's brothers, Cyril, worked in the store before it was purchased by Oliver. But I think we exchanged, and I want to thank the people that set up the Hugo History genealogy group on Facebook, because we found out we're related. Yeah, we are. So we are cousins, and there was Sue LaValle was here. So these are great opportunities to see people you've never met before from your family tree. Mm-hmm. And I think she might have departed, but she just lost a twin who's buried here.
Carol, are you close by?
My grandmother isn't buried here, but my dad is by the shrine over there.
My grandfather came to Onika Township there. Him and his brothers settled along a road out east of here, which is Homestead Avenue now. But years ago it was called Old Brisson Road because it was all Brissons that lived on that road. All the brothers came from Canada and settled down there. And my great-grandpa's name was Joseph Brisson. And so I'm related to all the Brissons here too, because my grandma, he had a daughter that was named Julia, and she married Mizel Miron, and they're buried over there in that corner there. And so and then my Uncle Clifford and his Clifford and his wife Rita are buried over there. They lived along the same road as my folks then. My dad took over that farm from my great-grandpa, which in between went to his son, anyway, his son married, they ended up moving to White Bear, and he sold the farm to my dad. And that's the farm that my brother has now. So that was on that old Brisson Road. And next door neighbor was the grandpa of David and Mary Gibbs and Mike's wife, Judy. They had the farm next door to us out in the country there. And so then my dad has lots over here, and some of my dad got a little baby brother that was buried there, and my dad's mother are buried there, and then two of my nieces are buried there, and then we have a lot farther in the new part, an 8 lot there, and my two son-in-laws who passed away are buried there, and then also Fran's daughter has a little girl buried over in there, and Fran's son Andrew has a little boy buried over in the far area. So there's a lot of them that are buried in here. So I won't get into anything more because
I'm not going to let you off that easy.
What? Okay.
Here we go.
When I first met George, Bob, you were probably in the same catechism class. George knew all the girls.
Yeah.
And the girls knew him.
Bob, vouch for this. Ann Guaffon, Regina and Hope Riopel, all those girls from that area where their farm was, he got along with them great. I mean, he would joke with them, and he would, go out on the recess and, play kickball or whatever with them. He was just a woman's man at that stage of his life.
Sure.
It's too bad he was only about 8 or 9 then. But he always had a big smile on his face. Always, just like this, okay? And he would tease those girls and cajole, bug them and stuff like that. But that's where I first met George, way back, Linda. And who else would know? Bob, you remember that.
Way back, we went to catechism,
That's
the school
right.
that was behind the church over there. That was the public school. We went there for summer catechism.
All the month
until
of
the
June.
school burnt down.
Yeah, all the month of June.
Yeah.
Anyways, that's George and Patty, his wife Patty, right there. They come to Arizona every winter. They have a place in Glendale. So we get together, we have a good time, we laugh a little bit, and maybe drink a Budweiser, and that's about it, huh?
Yeah.
Good.
A little reminiscing. And
George, thank you.
Thank you, George. Nice job.
He knows a lot about the different priests that went through Hugo. There were like 8 of them or something like that, but we're going to move on over that way. And
just a little bit of history on here. The cemetery is in good shape. We have a great fund here for Perpetual Care Fund, so this will be taken care of forever. A lot of us, a few years ago, we got together and raised a bunch of the fallen footstones and stuff. We raised them up and packed underneath them and set them back down and stuff. And then I think the men's club now is taking some of that over, and they're going to do some more of that because there's so many footstones and stuff that recessed in here. In fact, we found one with a probe that wasn't even visible at all from the surface. It had completely grown over. And so we raised a lot of them. We raised about 80 or 90 of them, I think. And then I think some of the men's club were going to take some of that over, and I think they're planning on doing more of them. So I think, Tom, you helped with that, and Don Marrier started it out.
Don Lacoste.
Don Lacoste. Don Lacoste
Oh,
started it
Centerville.
out. You probably helped, didn't you, Don?
No, but Don just
Yeah,
died
it
a
was
few years ago.
Don Lacoste that started it out anyway, and he got a bunch of us together, and Leon Mulner and myself, and I don't know, a bunch of other people anyway, and we did a bunch of them for a couple of years there. And
Where's Mary? Mary,
yep.
Yes. Oh.
I have a hat on.
Yep, got a chapeau on. Both George and Mary are on the cemetery committee. And I might add, on Memorial Day, last Monday, one of the Legionnaires came up to me and said they had some, John's still here, John Burker?
Yeah.
John, that they had some military or veterans stones and footstones that were sinking. And they were going to try to raise some of those footstones out here. John, are you familiar with that at all? No? Okay. I don't remember the man's name. I've got to stop by the Legion and pick up.
Connie Freever.
Pardon?
Connie Freever.
Anyway, I know there's a lot of people that are working to upgrade the cemetery in the sense that it's been here a long time. 1902, is that what it is?
Bill Cortot, maybe? Bill Cortot.
Is he in the Legion? It was somebody in your squad, John, that came up to me after you had done the performance, and he's got a list of veterans' names that they want to raise the...
Got that from Gloria. Gloria gave him the list.
You know?
I gave him the list.
Okay.
I forgot his name.
Anyway.
Wrote it down.
FYI,
No one knows who it is.
I went to the bar over here yesterday to see Richard Granger, and I do have a couple $100 coming already.
Oh, wonderful.
They're gladly, he and his brother. They're both Army veterans. Okay. Anyway, if you have some questions, you got two people here that are on the cemetery board, and they've done a wonderful job.
I haven't heard that name in so long.
Where to?
I'm just. We needed a building painted or something. He hired him, and we'd all have lunch. And so
Lorraine first shouted out he was mayor.
Carol Bernier Young.
First of all, I typed up meat pie. This came from originally from Mabel Granger and Luella Wigwar. So if anybody wants a copy of it, it's a gift from me. We make it at Christmas every year, and Karen, my sister who passed away, she used to make it, so I had to take over the chore. If you want the recipe, it's an original recipe. Help yourself.
I've got 4 of them. We're all different.
Well, yeah, they are all a little different, right? Okay, first I'll talk about my grandfather, who is buried in Centerville. Now, how I got all this information is that my dad is the baby of the family. I'm trying to find this picture here. And my grandfather, who I never met, he died even before my mom and dad were married. His brother, who lived in Cloquet, would come down on the train to visit, and then they'd drink. I'm sure they were drinking, and and they would talk about the days, because both of them came here as lumberjacks. And my dad was just a little tyke. He would sit and listen to him until they would notice him, and then they would kick him out of there. So that's how I got the information. Plus, from my cousins, they filled in a lot of information for me. Anyway, this is my dad's family, and this is the lumberjack I'm going to talk about first, Cyril Bernier, who came from Canada. So if anyone wants to see that, in 1871, my grandfather immigrated to Minnesota. Actually, he was the youngest son in Quebec. He lived south of Quebec on the other side of the river, maybe 30 miles, in a town called, let's see, I got to get my bearings here, St. Clair, Quebec. And he, because he wasn't the youngest son had to take care of the family, so he had to find his way. So he and his neighbor, Napoleon Morset, and Morset's lived next to the old bank. They came together, and they went to Vermont and cut trees for a year. And then in Vermont, they told them there wasn't any work anymore, but that they could go to St. Paul, they could go to Minnesota and get work as a lumberjack. So him and Morissette, they hopped on the train. They had no money. They spoke no English. They came in, in 1879. And they went to they had enough sense to go to the farmer's market because they knew people, French people from Centerville went there to sell hay and other goods. And they got a ride to Centerville where they knew some people, and he worked on farms in the summer, but then he was a lumberjack in Stillwater. He was in the woods for many years, 16 years. And he married, and he was still in the woods because they were always looking for cash money. And he did finally buy the farm, and it's on the same street as the Cummings farm, from what I figured out today. Where the blue heron is, if you go down a little west, that road that goes all the way to Forest Lake, and the house is still there. The barn fell over, but it is believed he worked. It is believed that he worked on the boom site, that tangle of trees that took them 2 weeks to untangle. He was paid $24 a month plus board. But on Friday, then there were other Frenchmen. They decided they wanted to go home, so they had to walk from Stillwater to Centerville. Well, they'd start walking, and pretty soon they'd run, and they'd run all the way home because they wanted to get there. They wanted to get there as fast as they could, which I thought, this all came from my grandfather and his brother.
They wanted to do it in one day.
Well, they wanted to get home on Friday night, I guess. I don't know. Anyway, it's believed after there wasn't any trees to cut around here, then he cut trees in Hinckley and Kettle River up there, and he'd take the train up there. And he'd get off the train with his axe and walk through the woods to the camp, and there would be wolves on the side. So that's kind of interesting. He also worked on a raft that went from across Lake Superior to Superior, Wisconsin, because they paid a lot of money for you to do that, and they did it at night. So you had those pokey sticks, but he did it once, and he said never again. It was so dangerous because if you got your foot caught between the logs, it would crush, and you'd probably fall in Lake Superior, and that'd be the end of you. But he married Mary Celeste Lacoste in 1891, and they lived on that farm, and he had to cut all the trees on that farm because it was all wooded, so you can imagine that's what he did in the winter. They would cut the trees, stack them up, and then when it was spring, they'd make rafts and float them down the rivers to Minneapolis or to Stillwater, because the trees up here had all been cut by that time. A few interesting things. That Grandpa bought a car in 1917, but he never drove it. His son had to drive him. They retired to the little house where I grew up. My parents lived in that house for almost more than that. They were married, I think 60-some years. And my grandma would sell butter and White Bear, and she'd sell ice cream to the train, and she brought the milk to the co-op in Centerville. So, they always trying to figure out how to get a little extra dough. And they would go to the farmer's market in St. Paul and sell hay, potatoes, and hogs. In fact, my uncle, who inherited the farm, he went with hay. And the last time he went, he came home, he says, there's too many cars, I'm not going again. He couldn't say, and then he never went again. But my dad would, when he retired in the little house where I grew up, he would walk to the farm, which is about 1.5 miles, help his son, and then come home. And in 1934, he sat down in the chair in the porch and died. So, he did what he loved. So now that was my grandpa. But the fact that we're all immigrants, we're all children of immigrants, I think what they went through, I don't think I could have gone through it, but as lots of you have talked about your families. Sure. Now, my dad, he moved in when my Uncle Ivan got the farm and got married. my dad had been living there with him when they were both bachelors. Then he moved to the little house in Hugo until he got married. And when he was getting married, my grandma said, I'll live with my 2 daughters. One lived in St. Paul and one lived in Forest Lake. And so then she said, you can buy the house for me. Well, it was during the Depression. They had 2 kids. When he didn't have any money, she'd say, you don't have to pay me this one. So, you know, it practically gave him the house. But it was interesting, I thought.
Carol.
Here is the certificate.
Would you bring up the fact that you've been to Canada? Yeah, you know, researching your name and where.
Well, I went on a tour with the guy from North Dakota, Virgil. Yeah, and there was a bus tour that went there, and we happened to stop. We didn't stop in the town, and you had to make a reservation. But we went by, right on the St. Lawrence River, a museum. It was about boats, and that craft, and it said Bernier up there, and I went, oh my gosh, that's my name. And so Virgil, who was the tour guide of us, he said, well, we have to go there since you're probably related to him. I said, I don't know if I was or not. But my dad was the mayor of Hugo. He was born in 1923. And it's interesting because I found his birth certificate, and Mingo was the doctor or the midwife, because you had something about the doctors.
That big house next to the church.
Well, either he was born in that house or at a midwife at the house. Who knows? He was one of 6 children. One of them died. When he went to 1st grade, he came home and he told my grandma, I'm not going back. And she said, why not? She says, I don't know what she's saying, because he only spoke French. So I imagine that was true for a lot of our grandparents. And but he always told me, he says, I'm terrible at English, writing and spelling and everything, because it wasn't my first language. I said, okay. He graduated from high school in 1931, so he had to walk from the farm to catch the bus in downtown Hugo. And not a lot of people graduated then, but he was younger than his siblings, and his siblings were a lot of domestics in White Bear, and they wanted to send him to college, and my dad said, what would I want that for? So he never went. But, you know, he was spoiled. He really was spoiled. Dad and Mom were married in 1937. When he was the mayor of Hugo, I got the certificate here, for 4 years, from 1950 to 1953. But I thought my mother had a scrapbook, which unfortunately I didn't save the whole thing, but I should have. This is kind of interesting. Pepin, this took place in Pepin was the mayor of Forest Lake, and they knew each other, because my dad worked for E.J. Poole a lot, which were relatives. And they had a fishing contest, and my dad won. And if you look at the picture, his fish was about this big. But he also...
How about the album that you found? It's an interesting story.
Oh, yeah, that's where I got these pictures. I found this album. When Mom died, I was there, and I would be throwing out junk, because it was a lot of junk. And I was in the bathroom, and way up in the cupboard, I saw something black up there, so I reached up, and it was an album with those old black ones, you know, with the black cover and the black pages. And I took it to the kitchen table, and I said, Dad, what is this? I've never seen it. He said, oh, that's from Louise. And my mother's name is Louise, but she's German from Forest Lake. And I said, from Columbus. I said, no, this is not Mom's family. And he says, no, Louise, my sister, who went to be a nun. And she was a bookkeeper in St. Paul, and she'd come out and take pictures at the farm. And then she decided to become a nun when she was a little older. And she gave my dad that album, and he stuck it up there, and we never saw it. So I have original, my cousin's, Ivan's children. I copied pictures of them. That would have been Sylvia, Millie, and Donna Bernier, if you know who they are. They were like shocked and thrilled to get these pictures, because that was their farm. So that was kind of fun, because we get together once in a while. And Dad also talked about when the sewer system went through, and it was a blessing because it saved this area lots of money to hook up the metropolitan sewer. But he was also a clerk, the treasurer for Hugo. Later on, after he was mayor, I was older then, I might have been in high school years. And I would remember him sitting at the kitchen table with the receipts for the water, adding it up. And so he was involved with the metropolitan thing and the water system, and that. The reason they had to do something about the sewers because the wells next to the lake were contaminated, and the people that lived next to Egg Lake were getting water that was contaminated, so they knew they had to do something. And luckily that metro system came through, so that was a blessing for this town. Now my grandma was a Lacoste. She was born in here, and the Lacoste is, you know where the Blue Heron is if you go across the street, Frenchman's Road, their farm was over in that area, which is all houses now. Anyway, this is a picture that was in that album, and it's a biplane, and I think it was on the Winslow farm, which is across the street from the Blue Heron. It was over there, and you can see all the, you got to look at it because we think it was from the 1920s. And my grandmother is in this picture. She's one right here. And this really tall lady is Winslow lady. And my dad said she could work like a man. And the plane, if somebody knows something about biplanes, you could probably date it, but I think it's from the 20s. And my grandma, her brother, got a ride on that plane for $5. And that was like something he wanted to do.
There's a lot of money then.
Oh yeah,
you could actually buy
but
warplanes
it's really
and pull the guns out and sold them.
well. It's made of cloth. You can tell it's made of cloth.
Yeah.
So if anybody wants to look at that picture, you're welcome to it. I wanted to say to people who are interested, if your ancestors were lumberjack, this book I read is fantastic. It was written by a lady from the University of Minnesota, and its reference has the greatest book about Minnesota and Wisconsin lumberjacks. She researched this like you wouldn't believe, because there's things I learned about. I always thought all of the wood from Minnesota went to Chicago. It didn't. It went down the river to Kansas, and it was cut up, and then a lot of the homes on the prairie, once they were out of their soddies, then they got the wood, you know. So if you're really interested in learning more about lumberjacks, you can get it at your local library, but it's a fantastic reference book.
Do they reference the, there was a fraternal organization of lumberjacks back then. Is it mentioned in that book?
You know, I'd have to look it up. I read the book quite a while ago. I was doing a paper on it.
Well, there was a Hugo chapter of this association of lumberjacks, and even when a lumberjack would die in St. Paul, the whole bunch from Hugo and Centerville would go down there to the funeral. Yeah.
So would that be at St. Louis Church then?
Must have been drinking involved.
I don't know.
Downtown St. Paul.
I'm sure the ride down there, absolutely.
Ascension. And this is the last thing I'm going to say. This is also from that album, and it's Marvin Lavelli told me that these are not haystacks; they're straw stacks. And if you look at the way they're constructed, different cultures made their haystacks differently. And if you look at the India, the Taj Mahal, those things on the 4 pillars around the Taj Mahal, I've never been there, but they are taken from haystacks. That's where they got the design for that. So here, and we believe that this is my dad's niece, and that Sister Joan, my dad's sister, came out to the farm and she took the picture of it. I have this hanging on my wall because it's just so cool. I really like this picture, but it's for anybody who wants to look at it. Oh, that's it. I mean, I could talk a long time, but I did a little research, and in 1910, the census of Hugo was 204. In 2014, it was 14,239. I wonder what it is right now. It's like a lot.
Well, after the war, we got overrun by people.
It's like 16,000.